Hi, and welcome to section 4 of this course. In this section, you will learn how to deploy applications to your Azure Kubernetes service. In this video, you will learn how to define a Kubernetes application using Visual Studio Code. To get your application deployed into Azure Kubernetes Service Cluster, you need to define an application configuration or manifest file. A manifest file is typically written in YAML and declares the desired state of the application as a Kubernetes deployment and Kubernetes service. The deployment creates and updates instances of your application based on the deployment manifest. The Kubernetes master node schedules mentioned application instances as pods into cluster agent nodes, that is, virtual machines. A pod is a group of one or more application containers that includes IP addresses and other information about how to run them. Deployments are isolated from networking. We need to configure the deployment to receive and eventually load balance requests. This is done by defining a service. Depending on the type of service used, these requests can come from external network or within the same cluster. The demo application we are going to deploy to Azure Kubernetes Service is the same we saw in section 1, video 3. It's Microsoft demo app that consists of a Python frontend app and a simple Redis image as a backend. The Docker file is again a very simple one. It's using a Python image published by Tiangolo, and it is installing Redis tools from Python Package Manager, and finally copying the application code from Azure Vault folder. In the Azure Vault folder, we have a main.python file, we have a configuration file, and finally an HTML file and a CSS file. Let's make the final changes to the application before building it. Once I've made my changes into my application, I can build the Docker file into a Docker image. I will do it with the command docker build, and I will use the -t parameter to tag my Docker image. As you'll see, once I have built my Docker image, my Visual Studio Code Docker extension shows the Docker image here on my left panel. Once I have built my Docker image, I'm going to upload it to my Azure Container Registry using Docker push. Once I have pushed the image into my Azure Container Registry, I'm able to view it from my Visual Studio Code Docker extension. Our application manifest consists of 2 deployments and 2 services. For backend deployment, we use publicly available Redis image from Docker Hub. We leave all the rest as default. We only customize the backend port to be exposed from the container pod. As we don't define a Kubernetes service type, the default is used, cluster IP. Cluster IP service type exposes the service on a cluster internal IP, making the service only reachable from within the cluster. Our backend service simply exposes the same port that we defined in our deployment, port 6379. The frontend deployment creates 2 replicated pods, indicated by the replicas field. For front-end container image, we use the Python application we just pushed to Azure Container Registry. As this is a private registry, we need to define the Azure AD service principal credentials that are used for pulling the image from Azure Container Registry securely. Note that we also define the deployment strategy for replacing existing pods with new ones, in case of upgrades or failures. We also define the minimum resources needed in the pod. This is defined in milli-CPU units. 1000 milli-CPUs equals 1 Azure Virtual CPU core. Our front-end service simply exposes the same port that we defined in our deployment, port 80. The load balancer service type exposes the service externally using Azure's load balancer. That's it for this video. Stay tuned for the next video, where you will deploy your defined application to Azure Kubernetes Service using kube control.